Dr. C Rangarajan, an eminent economist, has advised governments on various topical issues such as gas price formula, classification of expenditure, and poverty estimation. In the past, he has served many important posts such as RBI Governor, 12th Finance Commission Chairman, and Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council Chairman. Currently, he is Chairman of Madras School of Economics. Today, I'll be interacting with Dr. Rangarajan on the budget 2022-23 presented by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman on February 1. My first question to you is that the budget is relying on capex intensive economic growth. Well, how do you view this strategy given that there are competing demands from various other segments of the economy?
I think that the emphasis on increasing capital expenditure is a directional change which is welcome. It has always been argued that we really need to raise the level of capital expenditure of the government and lower the revenue expenditure. As far as the budget for 22-23 is concerned, of the total fiscal deficit, 45.2% of it will now be towards financing capital expenditure. Therefore, from a general point of view, raising the capital expenditure is a good move. Obviously, there are some questions regarding what constitutes capital expenditure, how well the capital expenditures will be incurred, and so on and so forth. I think these are critical issues associated always with capital expenditure. As you raise, there are competing demands. In the situation in which we are placed, as we are emerging out of the impact of COVID-19, a critical issue that arises is that how do we raise income levels and therefore the consumption expenditure of the people who have been severely affected because of COVID-19? It's a very legitimate question, and I think the government must address it. In a sense, the healthcare expenditures went up very substantially, including the expenditures on vaccination last year. Hopefully, the government will maintain the healthcare expenditures and other related expenditures at a level equal to or higher than what it is in the current year. I believe there is some additional fiscal space that is available. The possibility of raising the overall expenditure remains, and therefore, any additional expenditure that may be possible because of the additional revenue collection must go into areas where the need for meeting the immediate needs of the vulnerable sections can be met. But at the same time, I do believe that if the growth picks up during the year, some of the bad outcome of the impact of COVID-19 can be taken care of.
You are saying that if growth picks up, budget has assumed nominal growth of 11.1%, which means inflation in the range of 2.6 to 3.1%. How do you see these numbers?
First of all, on the rate of growth of 8 to 8.5% in 22-23, I have my reservations. I think it's a very optimistic estimate. The major reason for this is that if you look at 21-22, in the second half of that year, that is the current year, when there was no base advantage at all, the rate of growth of the economy was only 5.6%. Therefore, going into 2022-23, the expected jump from 5.6% to 8 to 8.5% appears to me to be a big leap and may not necessarily happen. So I would say perhaps a growth rate of 7 to 7.5% may be more realistic. You mentioned about the nominal growth rate of 11.1% mentioned in the budget. Yes, if you assume a real growth rate of 8 to 8.5%, this clearly implies a very low level of inflation. I don't think that will happen either. Therefore, the inflation level will continue to remain high. I mean, I would say close to 6% is quite possible. As far as the budget is concerned, the critical variable is not so much the real growth as the nominal growth, because tax calculation, expenditure calculations are all related to the nominal rate of growth or the nominal growth of the economy. I would therefore put the nominal growth rate of the economy in 22-23 at somewhere around 13%, as against 11.1%. This 13% could be a combination of 77.5% real rate of growth and maybe a 5 to 6% inflation. That I think is the combination, but what exactly the combination will be as we go along. But the nominal growth rate of 13% during the year 22-23 seems reasonable, and I think that the calculations in the budget would have been better if they had been predicated on the assumption of a nominal growth rate of 13%. This will actually give a higher level of revenue projections. It will give, therefore, an additional space for expenditure also.
So you mean to say that tax collection growth, which is pegged at 9.6%, is understated?
How does one look at it? I mean, the way one looks at it is really the growth rate in revenue is always related to the nominal rate of growth. And therefore, we talk about the buoyancy. Therefore, if you assume a 9.6%, or if the revenue projections are made on the assumption of a growth rate of 9.6%, we arrive at a buoyancy which is less than 1. I think it is about 0.87. That is the given the nominal growth and given the growth rate in the projected revenues, it is less than 1, because nominal growth rate is assumed to be 11.1%. And the growth rate in revenues are assumed to be 9.6%. Therefore, the buoyancy is less than 1. So I think that, as I mentioned earlier, possibility does exist in terms of raising the overall revenue projection. If you assume a buoyancy of 1.1, which we have seen in the past, and a nominal growth rate of 13%, then the revenue growth of 14.3% is possible. Therefore, looking at a broad picture, nominal growth rate of, as I mentioned, 13%, with the buoyancy of 1.1 will give us something like 14.3% growth rate in revenue projections. This is what I think will enable the government to raise the expenditures later on, or to bring down the fiscal deficit, whichever way they can handle it. But we will talk about it when we come to expenditures. But the point really is that the revenue projections are somewhat underestimated, in my view, in the budget. Usually, we accuse the government of overestimating revenues. The argument has always been that this is unrealistic, this is not achievable. But on the other hand, we get a budget now where I feel that the revenue projections are somewhat underestimated. Probably they are wanting to keep something in reserve. I don't know. But that doesn't make the budget realistic. Therefore, in my opinion, the growth rate of 9.6% is an underestimation. It can really be much higher.
When we come to breakup of tax collections, corporation tax is projected to grow by 13.4%, personal income tax by 13.8%. But given the scenario of subdued investment and loss of income by individuals, do you think these two collections could grow as high as over 13%?
It is possible. I mean, I think I have not made the calculations on individual taxes. But as I mentioned earlier, if you look at the overall picture, a much higher level of collection of taxes is possible. Because even in the 21-22, the revenue collections have beaten all estimates. I mean, I think everybody thought there is the impact of COVID-19. How can it be that revenues can rise? In fact, the revised estimates have been so much higher than the budget estimates. Because in terms of the collection of revenue, particularly direct taxes, it is much more what is happening to the upper deciles of the population than the lower deciles of the population. Therefore, it is quite possible a larger revenue collection may take place. But I have not individually calculated the corporate tax and the income tax. But I personally believe that if you assume an income growth rate of the order that I mentioned, it should not be difficult.
Coming to another aspect of taxes, there are various studies which say that income inequalities in India and other emerging economies have increased due to COVID, as well as in advanced countries. So, do you think that in that context, the budget should have imposed a super rich tax or increased surcharge on the highest slab?
There is need to look at our income tax structure. We have several slabs. We have cesses on that, surcharges on that, and so on. I think we really need to get rid of all the cesses and surcharges because they have essentially given a wrong picture about what the level of taxation is. And also, more particularly, the levy of cesses and surcharges deprive the state governments of the share in that revenue. Therefore, I would really suggest that the time has come for the government of India to take a close look at the various slabs and perhaps instead of levying a surcharge, we can introduce another slab even above what we have with a higher level of taxation. I think that would be the most appropriate thing to do. But whether it is something that we should do this year or whether we should do it next year is an issue. But certainly, we need to move in that direction of probably having only one tax rate on any slab without cesses and surcharges. Perhaps introducing an additional slab over and above what we now have with a higher level of taxation.
And what should it be? 35, 40?
I think we have really moved after liberalization to a more reasonable level of taxation. And while I will not venture the number today, but I think we need to talk about it. But certainly, somewhere in the region that you are talking about is possible. But I think whether the 35 or 35, a little more than 35% can be done because, as I said, we should remove all surcharges and cesses. And therefore, this is right now itself, it is tantamount to something like 35% because if you add the surcharges and all that, 30 plus it will become. So I think we can go somewhere between 35 and 40%. I mean, we need not touch 40, but it can be little less than 40.
But will it not scare wealth creators?
I know. I mean, this is the conflict always that arises. But one has to strike a balance. And I think after all, in the corporate taxation, some concessions were given 2 years ago. If additional investment is being made, then the corporate tax will come down and the production to start by 2023. That has been extended by 1 more year now. Therefore, some concessions maybe are given in corporate taxation for the purpose of inducing larger investment into the scene. So what we really need to do is to look at the concessions given on one side for generating income. And then once that income is generated, what the level of taxation should be. So there is always this conflict, but some balance has to be struck. But certainly, if you look at the personal income taxation, perhaps, as I said, we should not touch 40. Between 35 and 40 is something that I am that may be appropriate, but needs a little more analysis before coming to that number.
Now, if we touch another side of taxation, hike in customs duty was announced on number of products for Atmanirbhar Bharat program. Do you think this is a right strategy, or this is an accentuation of protectionist stance?
I think this is a step in the wrong direction. There are occasions on which uh, raising the customs duties or import duties may be warranted, particularly in the case of dumping and so on. And there are specific rules relating to that, and that is what the government should do. But to go on announcing in budget after budget, raising the import duties on commodity X or commodity Y or something uh, is not the right thing. It is almost reminiscent of the budgets before 1991. I think this is not appropriate. I think we should really be able to compete in the market. Our business units and enterprises should be strengthened in order to be able to compete in the market. Therefore, except in very small number of cases, this approach is not the right one. I think it gives a, if I may say so, a bad odor to a Make in India concept. We should not degenerate once again into an import substitution policy. Therefore, I would strongly urge moving away from this direction.
And on expenditure side, the government has cut petroleum, fertilizer, and food subsidies. How do you see it? Will it affect the vulnerable sections and the common man and farmers?
Fertilizer subsidies stand on a different footing, but it is not very clear. I mean, the speech did not mention, and it is not very clear as to how and in what manner they will bring about the reduction in the subsidies. Petroleum subsidies, if it goes down, we should not bother about it. I think people should know that petroleum is something that is imported, and we have to bear the cost of it. Only then we will realize the need to economize on the use of petroleum products. Fertilizer subsidies, unless I think we bring about a change in which a certain minimum amount of fertilizer, which can be supplied at the concessional level, beyond which the consumption should be at a higher level. This has been suggested by one of the committees also earlier. I think we really need to think about it. The richer the farmer, the larger the consumption of fertilizer. Therefore, some readjustment in the way in which we give fertilizer subsidies may be required, but at the same time taking care of the bulk of the farmers who are in the small category. Food subsidies, I have really a concern. I think that probably we should not really bring it down. I mean, I think this is the food subsidies should remain at the same level as it was before. But I have heard some comments saying that the food subsidies went up in the revised estimates, and they are only trying to bring it back to the earlier level. But any cut in food subsidies is something that one has to do it after great care. And but there is no description anywhere as to how this is to be brought about or what the intention is. Therefore, to summarize my views, petroleum subsidies, even if they go down, I don't mind. Fertilizer subsidies should be done in such a way that the small farmers and are not affected. On food subsidies, I would normally be against reducing it.
The budget has projected the centre's fiscal deficit to be a bit higher than budget estimates at 6.9% this financial year. And for the next financial year, it has pegged it at 6.4% of GDP. Now, the government is also aiming to bring it down to 4% by 2024-25. Do you think it is possible, given the current high level of fiscal deficit, to bring it down to 4% 3 years down the line?
Before going, you raised some question. I want to on expenditures. I want to add one more sentence because then it will come to fiscal deficit. We talked about revenue. We talked a little bit about expenditures. I think that's how we started the whole discussion.
Yeah.
But I really want to tell that while capital expenditures have gone up quite substantially, the overall expenditures over the revised estimates have gone up only by, if I remember, 4.6%. That is why I feel that there is a case for raising the total level of expenditures. And my argument is that there is space for it. If you allow for the nominal growth rate to be higher than what they have indicated, the revenue projections may go up, and therefore it will give you the possibility for a higher level of expenditure. Because while the big increase in capital expenditure of 24.5% over budget estimates, and I think slightly lower on the revised estimates. Therefore, the revenue expenditures are actually going by a very small amount. I mean, if the total is 4.6, you can see that the revenue expenditures growth must be very small. I think there is some case for raising that, which will take care of some of the problems you have raised on taking care of the vulnerable sections and perhaps adjusting the subsidies, particularly on the food subsidies. Now I come to the other question that basically on the fiscal deficit. In some sense, the reduction in the fiscal deficit by 0.5 percentage points in the next year from the current year's level of 6.9% is a step in the right direction, but that is not enough to reach the level that they have thought about of reaching in 25, 26 and all that. I think it will require a substantial reduction in the fiscal deficit in the subsequent years. I don't think it will be possible at all. I think a larger reduction in the fiscal deficit may be needed. And let us also look at it. The borrowing program is going to be very high. I think this is for looking at the market borrowing program. There are other sources of borrowing as far as the government is concerned, but purely looking at the market borrowing program, which includes government securities and treasury bills, it goes up from 8.7 lakh crores to 11.5 crores in the 2022-23. This is a big jump. And as a consequence of this, what are the things that we are talking about? I mean, I think the center's debt will go up from 59.90% of the GDP to 60.2% of the GDP. Remember the FRBM Act, Amendment Act, the FRBM Committee, NK Committee, had recommended 40% as the goal for the center. What we are talking about is a far cry from that. Therefore, while the need for raising expenditures in the context of the situation like COVID-19 is well recognized, we also have to take note of the medium-term goals that we have in mind. Let me tell you one other number, which is very striking. If you look at the budgets, interest payments of the center out of the revenue receipts of the center is going to be in 22-23, 42.7%. This is a big preemption of the total revenue. You are virtually saying only half of, or little more than half of the revenue receipts is available for all other expenditures. Therefore, we need to have a medium-term objective. It is essential from now on to reduce the fiscal deficit at a much higher pace than what has been indicated in the budget. Let's go back and see once again. The center's fiscal deficit is budgeted to be 6.4% of the GDP. All the states taken together will be 4%. Therefore, we are talking of the center and the states taken together a fiscal deficit of 10.4% of the GDP. And the household sector savings in financial assets is no more than 7 to 7.5% of the GDP. So where from will this come? I mean, expecting people outside India to contribute to rupee-denominated bonds, the possibility is there, but not very much will come because they will have to bear the exchange risk also. Therefore, they may not come. Therefore, we have to have a medium-term program. And that, I think, in the coming years, it is important to see how the fiscal deficit should move in what direction. I understand the problems in the current year. I understand the problems faced immediately after COVID-19. A higher level of expenditure is warranted, and therefore it will result in a high fiscal deficit. But going ahead, we need to have a clear idea of what our medium-term goals are, and therefore begin to reduce the fiscal deficit at a much faster pace in the coming years.
This huge market borrowings, generally it is expected that huge market borrowings will crowd out private sector investment. But government is saying that it will crowd in private investments. What is your take?
The point really is that generally, if the total borrowing is limited by the household savings in financial assets, that is what is a surplus available to the government, to the private sector, to everybody. Therefore, the larger the government borrows out of that, it leaves less for the private investment. But the point really is that right now, as I mentioned earlier, the total amount of borrowing which the government is going to do is also going to be much larger, because the center and the states taken together, than the household sector saving in financial assets. Therefore, there is a liquidity support that has to come. Therefore, the question really is, what is the level of sentiment in the private sector for increasing its investment? Whether the increased production will come because of better utilization of existing capacity or by addition to capacity, because there is a view that the capacity utilization is only about 60% or somewhere around that number. Therefore, there is capacity already available in the system. If the demand picks up, then there probably there will be a better utilization of capacity. But certainly in this year, where there will be a certain amount of liquidity support coming from the central bank the Reserve Bank of India, to the system, it may be possible. Therefore, the question will really be pertinent when the private investment exceeds some certain level. Perhaps that may not happen in 22, 23. But 23, 24, we need to watch out more clearly.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Rangarajan. Thanks a lot for talking with us.
Okay, thank you.
If you like this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.